Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. We are at level yellow, right in the middle. This week my guest is someone who knows what danger level we're at, or lack thereof, in terms of Homeland Security. Lieutenant Governor Dave Heineman is the chair of the Nebraska Homeland Security Policy Group, which really means that, and we've got, of course, the head of the National Guard, and there's our emergency management system in place. But with the concern about terrorism, it just takes a few more sets of eyes kind of looking at the big picture.
It really does, Carol, and we've handled this so much differently than most states. Not only did we include on our Homeland Security Policy Group the head of the State Patrol, the State Fire Marshal, the head of the National Guard, and the head of Nebraska Emergency Management, we went 2 steps further than any other state, and it's paid great dividends. It's now kind of called the Nebraska model. We included the top leadership of Health and Human Services, and then the University of Nebraska system, in which President Smith appointed Chancellor Moore of the Med Center to be the representative. And that's really helped us in terms of bioterrorism, agri-terrorism, all of the things that go on in the academic community that are integrated in our overall plan.
I think that you and one other lieutenant governor are stand out as those being sort of the point man in the state, point person. I think it's Indiana or Illinois. There's like 2 lieutenant governors, and you are among one of 2.
And I think the other states are beginning to realize, because of the way we're funded, there's money that comes down from the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services and the Centers for Disease Control. That's kind of the bioterrorism money. If you don't have one entity to coordinate it all, like our Homeland Security Policy Group, you keep it in stovepipes, you have turf battles, you have turf protection.
Log
jams.
We're hearing about that in the news.
And that's not going on in Nebraska. And there's so many good examples that I can give to you, I assume we'll get into, where we are working together as a team. It's kind of our Nebraska common sense, I like to say, where we're supposed to do, and we do the right thing, regardless of where the money came from, to do what's right in the best interest of the citizens, particularly when you're talking about Homeland Security.
Now, not to give this administration a lot of credit, but it is a fact, and if you talk to people in the medical field, in the emergency management field in the state, in the law enforcement field, they do agree that Nebraska, to their way of thinking and talking with folks in other states, when it first started getting the kind of money, but this is before 9/11, the kind of money that was supposed to come into the state for, not Homeland Security at that time, we didn't call it, but for security, let's just say pre 9/11, we used ours to set up an infrastructure of people that put us ahead of a lot of states.
If you go back and you look at the FY02 money that was distributed really prior to 9/11, that money was based on a 1999 assessment of the state. What are our vulnerabilities? What are our weak points? And how do we enhance and move to a baseline capacity in every county and every city across the state? That's how we distributed that money. It paid great dividends for us. And then with the 03 money and the 03 supplemental money, we decided, in order to move everybody forward, now that they had a baseline capacity, we allocated $10,000 to every county and the rest on population. And we told the local emergency manager, for example, here in Douglas County, your responsibility is to bring together all the cities, police, fire, and everybody, and you sit around the table and you make the decision how to use that money in Douglas County, the city of Omaha, Ralston, Elkhorn, whatever. We're not going to make that decision sitting in the state capitol. That's paid great dividends for us.
And we should say that in addition to the traditional public safety entities, there have been hospitals, the medical side, because there's all the number of issues that have to be considered this are innumerable. I mean, how are you going to determine at any given time how well stocked hospital supply rooms are? How, where would you get emergency medicines? What pipeline would Nebraska work through? I mean, they had started on this before that.
They had started on it before that, and again, Carol, one of the things we emphasize when we're out there with local units of government, I want to make sure that law enforcement and fire departments, for example, and emergency managers have an understanding how the public health system works, how the hospitals work, how the doctors are involved in all this. And so we ask them all to come together. They don't got to become experts, and yet on the other hand, the public health officials, all the healthcare professionals in the state, they need to have a better understanding how law enforcement, the military, fire, everybody works together. So it's been that team effort that I believe has gained us national recognition all across the country, and we got Secretary Ridge to come out here, and he's emphasized that on more than one occasion.
The interesting thing is that if they're, knock on all kinds of wood and whatever, anything to happen here or any other part of the country, you can't waste a lot of time introducing these entities a little more in depth to one another.
That's right.
There will be snap decisions made on very broad levels involving many groups of people.
And the other thing that we've tried to do in Nebraska, because that's exactly right, Carol, is in a way a terrorism event is like any other kind of natural disaster or an emergency we've got to respond to.
Triage kinds of things.
And we're working together all the time so that if we have that terrorism event, which may be bigger in scale, we're prepared to go. We're already beginning to do a number of different exercising and training opportunities. And I will tell you the thing I've been most impressed, and I've traveled the state from Omaha to Ballantyne to Gering to Alma to places that I almost never knew existed in Nebraska. Everybody's taken their responsibility seriously. Now, in a lot of areas, they're not at the top of the list, but they want to make sure they're prepared. The other thing we try to do is we have 10 different cities in the state that we have a memorandum of understanding with. They become a state asset in the event of a hazardous materials incident or weapons of mass destruction. The Omaha Fire Department, for example, is one of those. And we work together.
In other words, then the chain of command is very clear.
Very, very clear.
So that there's no politics wondering who does what, that it's from the top down.
That's exactly right. And we don't want there to be any doubt about that. And if we have one of those incidences, we've got to be prepared to work together. And yet we can't have every city be prepared to do hazardous material incident or weapons of mass destruction. That's not an efficient use of our money. And
it's
it
like
just
the
wouldn't
National
work.
Guard. It's like these 10 cities, you would be able to commandeer them and their expertise and their equipment to.
And they would go, if, let's say we needed Omaha to go down over to Wahoo or out to Columbus or whatever, you bet. We would put them on the road. We know exactly where they would need to go, and they're prepared to do that.
Yeah, their hazmat units would be, and all that sort of thing would be ready to go.
Yeah, and you take these hazmat units, and I'm not an expert on those kind of details.
Neither am
totally. You can't have every one of those in every community in the state. There's too much training that's required. The other thing we can't forget in Nebraska is true of most states. 80 to 90% of the firefighters in our state are volunteers.
Absolutely.
And there's a level, and they do a very, very good job. But when you start talking about hazardous materials and all that, it's on a higher and higher level. And in many cases, there are only so many units that can train for that.
Let's talk about communication. I think from talking to several people in just the day-to-day work of covering the news the last many years, communication can get you. The lack of. I look at, there was I think up by Sheldon there was a bus crash and they couldn't have different law enforcement entities couldn't talk to each other. There was a situation of a felon holding somebody hostage, and the different jurisdictions of just law enforcement, let alone other public safety like fire and rescue, couldn't talk to one another. We're not alone in facing this problem, but this is a key component that may be harder to do than some of the other things.
If there's anything I could try to communicate to the citizens of Nebraska, it's a much more complex issue than people realize. To get all of this equipment in every police department and fire department, emergency management, to the military when they're involved, to be able to communicate is not as easy as everybody thinks. But the thing I do want to emphasize, over the last couple of years, local jurisdictions have made great progress. And so now I think we're faced with a situation. Now that Douglas County is beginning to make progress and they can communicate among each other, and Lancaster County's done the same thing. How do we take all these jurisdictions and get them working together in a statewide system? That is a challenge.
It's a challenge because you're going backwards almost. Not backwards like lack of progress, but normally if you were developing an infrastructure, which is really what you're talking about, you would map it out and then figure out the components, but because of the way local communications are funded, those components are already happening before you have sort of the math.
They are, and the other thing, and Nebraskans are very, very independent, as I tell law enforcement and fire all the time, and everybody's used to dealing with their equipment, and we don't want to be told exactly what to do, but everybody's beginning to understand we need to work together better. And again, the better interoperability we have at the local level, the easier it's going to be ultimately to obtain it at the state level. And I think we're making progress.
Give me a timetable. I mean, if you had to guess now, given that there are, the legislature has approved this in, I think, '02, but they never funded it, and we can't use a lot of the federal funds because they have to go to local entities for Homeland Security.
Well, but there are two parts to that. We're going to see this in the FY04 funds. We're putting an emphasis on communications. And so as a Douglas County or a Furnace County or whatever county in the state applies for that money, and it's focused on communications, there are going to be certain standards associated with that, Carol, that will allow us to achieve that interoperability. But the challenge long term, and I'm guessing it's a couple of years away yet, financially, our state is challenged like every other state, and the question is, where can we get $75 to $100 million to build the infrastructure, particularly the towers, that would take away the dead space out there so they could communicate. And I'm just, being very candid, I think it's a couple of years away, because right now, if we had an extra $50 million, my guess is we'd put it in education, for example.
Right, because of the other financial constraints that we're facing.
Right, and they've had to tighten their belt, be it the university or K through 12, and we need to take care of those needs first. The other reason maybe we can wait a little bit, again, I applaud local units of government for what they've done to move forward on the interoperability communication systems. They've made great progress. We're doing some patchwork. It's not perfect, but fortunately it's still working.
There's another form of communication that I know, for instance, Dr. Hendricks at the University of Nebraska Medical Center was concerned about, is called computer communication, and particularly in terms of health threats. I'm thinking of both bio and chemical terrorism. That health officials, health practitioners, health identifiers are able to communicate in database from one source. How are we doing on that?
Well, we've made great progress. This is another area where I think Nebraska's taken the lead, thanks to the Med Center and others. We have a new health alert network in the system in the state. Prior to 9/11, none of us thought about that we had to contact every public health district, every hospital, virtually every doctor and healthcare professional on a moment's notice. We now have that capability. It pays great dividends. If I can use an example, when we went on a heightened state of alert on Sunday, December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, I did a conference call with Secretary Ridge at 11:30 in the morning. When I got done, I made a call to the governor, and we agreed about how we were going to implement that. One of the first 3 calls I made was the Chief Medical Officer of the state, Dr. Raymond, and we put out a health alert network within 15 minutes of being notified we were going on a heightened state alert, and we notified every hospital, every public health district, and virtually every doctor in the state. So we've made great strides.
So there's parallel systems, not perfect, on the radio communication side for law enforcement, public safety, and health entities.
Well, let me just go a little bit further what happened on December 23rd. My first call was to the head of the state patrol to tell him we need to put the patrol on a heightened state of alert to increase their surveillance and monitoring of the various critical assets, critical infrastructure in the state. The second call was to General Lemke to do the same thing for Nebraska Emergency Management. We put our Emergency Operations Center on standby alert, so we were prepared to move immediately. And then the third call was to Dr. Raymond. The fourth thing I did was I put out an email communication to every local fire department, state, our law enforcement agency in the state, and our mayors and our county board chairs. So there are a variety of ways where we have redundant communications to get that word out quickly and effectively.
You have spent a number of hours probably now since 9/11 on the phone in conference calls. The communication between Washington and the states, I have heard you in public mention before that you don't feel left behind.
No, we don't.
As a state representative, that Nebraska is left behind, or maybe New York and LA get first dibs on info. That it's pretty.
That's
even.
really true. I'll go back to December 23rd. I took that call at my home in Fremont. 11:30 in the morning, and at the same time I was kind of watching TV as I was listening. We were a half hour into that conference call before any television station in the country knew that we were going on a heightened state of alert. That gives us a chance to get the word out all across the state to alert people.
Through those systems you just mentioned.
Through the systems I just mentioned, to make them aware of what we're doing. Now, it's not perfect, and if we have an event and it hits, clearly the news media is going to know as quickly as anyone. But yes, Secretary Ridge, I applaud him for what he's done. Not only these conference calls, which we tend to do 2 or 3 times a month, and we get the opportunity to interact with him. He'll be on for 10 or 15 minutes, tell us what he needs to inform us about, and then for 15, 20, 30 minutes, we can ask him any question we want. More agencies of the federal government ought to do this, I can tell you that.
Okay, so you said that you noticed about a half-hour lag time between when you were getting the word and the networks were getting it, and they've got people working
right.
in Washington all the time. I mean, they're 24 hours. But what do you think then is the lag before the time Tom Ridge and his people decide we are going on a next higher alert, and the time the states get the information?
There's not a lot of time there, and it would depend on the circumstances, whether an incident...
Just in general, from what the best you have a feel for.
As soon as they make that decision, generally we're going to know within about an hour, I think.
They go into the process of making this call to where all the states are online.
All the states are on lines. Then they try to make a call to the largest cities in the country and several other entities. And remember, we also need to notify certain private sector companies out there what's
vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Railroads, electric utilities.
90% of our critical infrastructure in this state is privately owned, not just in our state, but across the country. And so we also have mechanisms to communicate with them directly too. And I'm going to say a year or so ago, we went on a railroad-specific alert. I actually got to the Union Pacific before they learned through their national channels. And again, it's because we know each other, and we'd rather make sure that they know about it. Redundant capability is critical.
Speaking of private companies, I believe it was just in the last couple of weeks that the system went into play that companies had to release privately and discreetly and confidentially their vulnerabilities to the government. Is this on time pretty much, do you think, in terms of how the government system, information system could even receive this? I'm sure they knew of some.
Right.
But
I would say
in
this.
a formal way?
I was in Washington, D.C. last week, and we were at a Homeland Security conference for 2 days. It's at the beginning stages. I think there's a lot of work to be done yet. We also have already identified a lot of critical infrastructure in the state.
Just common sense.
Just common sense. I mean, a couple I can say because people know we do have 2 nuclear power plants. In the fall, Memorial Stadium is the 3rd largest city in the state. We do some extra special things. Now, you get beyond that, and I'm probably not going to say in an open public forum exactly what we're involved in, but we've already identified those structures, and Nebraska has more critical infrastructure than you might realize, and several that impact not only on Nebraska, but impact on our nation as a whole.
Well, I know I've been to, when I was out at Meade, and I've been on other feedlots where you can't even get it. You used to be able to drive in if you knew somebody that ran one of the big feedlots, and go say hi. You've got bioterrorism, cleanliness, and it goes for health too. We obviously, and I hate to say those 2 words together, mad cow, but I mean those kinds of bio threats that are just naturally occurring. But this is a whole new world for several reasons, for some of the things that we thought were the most kind of relaxed kind of businesses, and that world of ag. We have sort of a fairy tale idea of it, we folks in the city.
Carol, you've identified, I think, what is clearly the most serious problem in the state of Nebraska. It's not that we have a World Trade Center that they're going to attack. If the terrorists get beyond their traditional MO right now, a big building, symbolic, a lot of people in it, and they want to announce it 60 seconds after they've done it, and they think about where they can do real damage to America and to our state and the Midwest in general, it'll be an agri-terrorism, bioterrorism event involving the food supply. And that's where I try to emphasize to my friends in Omaha and Lincoln, we don't have feedlots in the urban areas. It'll be out in West Point and Wisner. It'll be out in Holdridge. It'll be out in Gibbon, Nebraska, which has the most rail traffic every day of any place in the country. And those areas of Nebraska have to be as well qualified to respond to a terrorism event as Omaha and Lincoln. And so that's our challenge. Right now, maybe we're not at the top of the list, but you start thinking about mad cow, foreign animal disease breakout. And I can just share with you that Nebraska is one of 6 states. 2 years ago, we went back to Washington, D.C. in a special simulation exercise. Director of Agriculture, State Veterinarian, NEMA Director, and myself, and we participated in a day-long exercise. How would the country as a whole respond to that sort of outbreak? And I was very, very impressed of how well we're prepared. Nebraska is probably more prepared than most states. I'd say Nebraska and North Carolina are the 2 best prepared states in the country when it comes to a foreign animal disease breakout.
The thing that amazes me is that one of the most horrible outcomes, other than the horrific loss of life in New York and Pennsylvania from 9/11 in Washington, technically Arlington, but is that it has literally turned us upside down in terms of we have to cover 1,000 bases, 1,000,000 bases, as opposed to just those kinds of tall targets or this. They've really got us flummoxed in a sense, but then on the other hand, we are prepared for a lot more than we ever would be.
I think that's right. It's a nationwide threat. It's not, at this stage of the game, regional threat that we can identify it specifically. Terrorists are not dumb. They don't say, oh yeah, 2 o'clock, UNO in Omaha, we're going to attack on a certain day. So we have to be prepared for more events. However, I do want to emphasize, I believe we are safer and more secure today in America than we were on 9/11 for 2 reasons. Number one, the young men and women of our United States Armed Forces and what they're doing in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places throughout the world, and then all the homeland security efforts of the 50 states. I think it would be hard to pull off a 9/11 aviation incident occurring within the United States today. Maybe an international flight coming in, but not flights taking off in America because of the progress we've made, for example.
On the other hand, and I'm not totally on the other hand, like the flip side, because there's not a totally flip side. We probably have made lots of progress. We still have, the transportation, TSA, Transportation Security Administration, is still fighting some of the things they were fighting long before. The turnover in good security people. Still there are potential weapons going on there, talking about huge fines. I know you don't work directly with them, but we do have a couple of airports here.
We do, and
big, good-sized airports.
And they're important. And let me just say, even on December 23rd, because we were briefed that it was an aviation concern in particular, I did call Mike Kudlatz, head of airport security at Epling, make sure he was aware and to hear directly from me what Secretary Ridge said. We've made progress, but I also want to emphasize to every Nebraskan, we can't prevent every single attack. I think most Americans know that, but we're better prepared. We're better prepared to respond. We can respond very quickly and very effectively, but I don't know we'll ever get to a stage that you can prevent every single incident. I will say I'm very impressed with the security that goes on in Omaha and Lincoln, the ones I know about best of all, and I think it's better than what I see in other major airports in the country.
It certainly does seem to be orderly, and there aren't long waits. Certainly the numbers work in our favor.
The numbers work, but I also think they understand their job better, and maybe they've mastered it quicker than some of the other airports, and maybe they don't have quite the same turnover. I'm not sure, but I just feel better when I go through airport security in Omaha than what I see in Washington, D.C. or Chicago or Atlanta, depending where I'm going.
There is concern nationwide, and I don't know how it would translate to Nebraska, and I know you don't speak for the National Guard per se, that's why we have Major General Lemke. But there is concern, and was concern expressed at the winter governor's meeting in Washington about the strain on the Guard for Iraq. In fact, 22% of the troops in Iraq are Guard now. They think it might move to 40% in the future. That does, and we have a land of tornadoes here. It's just the things we worry about on a day-to-day basis, blizzards, tornadoes. So there is a concern nationally about the Guard. There's
a legitimate concern. Most people who serve in the Guard or the Reserve, they do it because they want to help their country. And they don't mind being called up once every 4 or 5 years. But if you start calling them once up every 2 years, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work with their employers or whatever. The other thing that the Guard has impacted all of us on is many of these individuals serving in the Guard are the same people who are law enforcement in fire. And so it's had an impact locally particularly in many communities across the state, where I've heard them talk, they've lost up to 30-40% of their fire department because they're serving in the Guard. So serious
Especially
problem.
in these volunteer areas.
Volunteer
where
areas.
Any Guards man or woman could have been a volunteer. It's not like they're, they were, that's their career. Any one of them could have also, doing double duty in the volunteer
And it's just
corps.
natural if you're in the Guard, you're probably maybe involved in law enforcement or fire. So it is a serious issue, and if that deployment goes on too long, it does impact all of us.
And they're concerned about, re-upping, getting new blood in, and those very well-trained people that they're afraid may leave earlier than they might.
So far, we've been pretty fortunate in that area. It hasn't impacted yet. I think we're all concerned what's going to happen a year from now, 2 years from now, if we don't end this effort and move forward.
Not to, play boogeyman,
Okay.
because I know they don't do henny penny or chicken little unnecessarily, but if you had the money in our budget to do something besides the statewide, solve the statewide communication problem, where would you, if you were the fairy godfather of emergency management, where would you put money right now?
Well, I think the first thing I would do that I've learned in this job the last 2 years is I'd bring all the professionals together and I'd say, okay guys, if we had all this extra money all of a sudden, what do you think? Where do you think we should spend it? And the men and women serving in law enforcement, fire, emergency management, our hospitals, the med centers, they would give me a very good idea. But I would think one of the areas that we would use a lot of money would now begin to exercise and train more. We've gotten a lot of the equipment. Now we need to make sure we know how to use it. We have our right command and control centers in operation. So I'd say training and exercising is where we're going to head next if we got particularly an additional sum of money.
We have less than a minute, and I just want to know what % would you say, and I'm not holding you to it exactly, of our first responders are properly equipped for a chemical or bio terrorism?
I don't know if I can answer that.
Or half? Are we?
I think it's well over half given my conversations with people, but it varies from unit to unit, and it varies from whether you're probably in Valentine and what you think the priority is versus Omaha and Lincoln and what you're faced with on a day-to-day basis.
But we're making progress.
We're making great progress. I hear that from fire departments all across the state.
Well, I sure want to thank you for taking the time. You can check our website and catch the state of Nebraska's website for Homeland Security. And always good to have you. People of Fremont are happy to have you living there. And hello to your wife, who was a Maide princess here at the University of Nebraska at Omaha.
She always reminds me of that.
Thank you so much. Have a good week. Join us next week.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.